Hello and welcome to Sunrise Cardcast, your one-stop podcast shop for all things hockey cards. My name is Eric Andrews, also known in the hobby as Hammerhawks, and I'm joined by my co-host and fellow hobbyist Aaron Goldstein, better known in the hobby as Crease Collector. So before jumping into the main topic for the episode, we're going to start off by showing a few recent additions to our collections. And though nothing is nearly as extravagant as some of the cards shown off in the last episode, episode 63, which you should go back and watch that on YouTube if you have not yet done so. These are still some pretty cool pickups, and some of them are really nice and significant for us. So we just wanted to start out with that. So I'm going to start out with mine since there's quite a few, and then Aaron has one bigger one that he'll show off at the end. So my first one, actually my first two, are kind of a little bit more unique outside of the box things for me that no one would ever guess, what these things are, and you wouldn't have any reason to know. And Aaron doesn't even know about this first one or know the significance or connection. So the first one, again, this is very outside the box for me, not something I would typically pick up. It's actually a baseball card, and it is from the brand new 2022 Topps Pristine product. Now, of course, you guys know at this point that obviously I'm a big Topps Pristine fan, but baseball, that's not normally something that I would do. So the reason for that, I'll share the card first and then I kind of explain a little bit why. But it is, of course, fittingly a gold refractor, which these are numbered out of 50 for this year's product, of a pitcher for the Milwaukee Brewers named Jake Cousins. And, again, you guys are saying, well, what the heck are you doing picking up baseball cards? Jake was actually a friend of mine in high school. We had some classes together, and he ended up pitching D1 at, I think, Penn, and kind of had a long road to get to the MLB after being drafted, but finally made it last year, and I think has been pitching for them again this year. So he has rookie cards in the 2022 products. So when I found out about that, I thought that was really cool and thought that obviously getting a Topps Pristine gold refractor of him would be a pretty cool card to have. So definitely, kind of off the beaten path for me there, but a really cool addition nonetheless.
Yeah, very cool pickup. It's always cool when you can kind of tie it back to personal memory, and obviously seeing someone like that make the show is just extra cool. So I'm glad you can pick up those cards. I mean, as an American, you know how important baseball cards are. So I see here and there you've added them into your collections over the years. So always adding a baseball card here and there is just I'm sure for you pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's been fun kind of even just since I learned that he had cards, which that was probably only a few weeks ago that I became aware of that or thought to look. Just kind of even seeing some of the sets and the brands and stuff is just something that we're not used to over here on the hockey side of things. Topps is obviously the main manufacturer of baseball cards. So there's just some product lines in baseball that have never, existed in the past in hockey, things like Gypsy Queen and stuff like that just have never been a thing in hockey. So just kind of seeing and learning about those cards has been really fun through this. I also did buy just his very basic Topps rookie card on COMC. So I'll have that coming at some point. That's a 50-cent card or whatever. So nothing overly interesting, but I thought, grabbing just his standard Topps rookie card would be pretty cool too. So that'll be coming down the road. But yeah, just a cool card and something that fits my collection just as far as what it actually is too, being that Topps Pristine gold refractor, just a cool kind of double connection there for the PC. The next one, Aaron does know about this one, but again, something that you guys would not know about or, have any reason to know about for the most part. Aaron can see it in my background right here, but I recently got a signed photo of a girl named Addie Wiley, and again, you guys have no reason to know who she is or anything about her, but for my job, I am the PR person for the school district in the town that I live in. And Addie has been just a generational type of athlete that we've had come through our high school in the last 4 years. She just graduated this past spring. And I don't use the word generational lightly when it comes, to talent, but it definitely fits her. And, she has just had a historic high school career, ended up winning 5 individual state championships in track and field, was a 3-time All-State runner in cross country, played soccer and basketball as well, but wasn't, anything wildly special in those. Running has always been her main thing. But even just, since graduating in the spring, has done some pretty amazing things. She won a couple of national meets, like national championship type of meets, including the under 20 1500, which, as an 18-year-old winning an under 20 meet is pretty cool. And, one of the biggest things that she's done, which is just insane, is she set the all-time national record in the 1600-meter run. And, again, you hear that and you're like, okay, whatever. But then you stop and think about it. Any girl in United States history that has ever ran the 1600-meter run, she has the best time ever. And it's not like she just broke that by a tenth of a second or half a second or a second. She broke that by over 7 seconds earlier this summer. So that is just like mind-boggling to sit back and think about that type of accomplishment. And she'll be going off to the under 20 world championships representing the US in the 1500 here pretty soon, actually. That's in the country of Colombia. So I know she's excited about that. And then she'll start her collegiate career at the University of Colorado, and definitely has her sights set on the Olympics. And I will not be surprised if and when she gets there. So yeah, but it's just a really cool piece for me because I actually took that photo of her. She was just a few steps away from winning one of her state championships when I took that photo. So we ended up honoring her at a school board meeting recently. So I had that photo printed off as a 16 by 20 and got her to sign it for me. And obviously you see the inscriptions if you're watching on YouTube, the 5-time state champion and 1600 national record holder. So just a really cool and meaningful piece for me. Obviously not a card, not hockey related, but just a really cool piece, of someone that I really enjoyed watching compete and grow as an athlete over these last 4 years. And it'll be very exciting seeing what she does in the future. So remember that name, Addie Wiley. You'll very well could see her down the road in the Olympics one day. So really cool there. And then transitioning into, quote unquote, normal stuff for me, stuff that is not all that surprising. First one, this is a type of card I've always really wanted, and just it's never really been a priority, but it's always kind of been one of those things. If I get one, cool, that'd be great. It is from 1920 Artifacts, and it is an arena artifacts for the Chicago Blackhawks of Tony Esposito. So these actually have a piece. It doesn't say what it is, but it seems like it's like a brick or something from the Chicago Stadium, which is the arena that the Blackhawks played in for quite a while. So yeah, very cool card. I know these are very desirable, and they've done these for, various original 6 teams in the past. I think like Detroit has them for the Olympia and things like that. But yeah, just a cool card that I've always kind of wanted one, and found one on Facebook for a pretty good deal. And just a really cool Blackhawks related piece there. Next one, getting into the player collections, Ryan Dzingel is in SP Authentic for 2021. And of course, with that being in the base set, you have all the parallels. So of course, he has one of the black parallels, which are, historically very difficult to find. And it seems like they are a little bit more plentiful this year, which is kind of helpful. So I was lucky enough to find and acquire one of his black base parallels, and I didn't know if it would be signed or not, but cool enough, they are. So I was able to get one of his SP Authentic black
great cards
auto parallels. Very cool. So yeah, I had never had one of these black base parallels before. So being able to get one of one of my players is really cool.
Great design too this year.
Yes, they are very
Just
sharp
awesome
looking, and obviously the gold ink pops off the card really nicely, especially with the gold foil accents. It's just a very clean and sharp looking card for sure. So definitely a cool one there. And speaking of black parallels from SP Authentic, as you guys might recall, one card I was really looking forward to picking up from 2021 SP Authentic was the Sign of the Times black parallel of Nicholas Hjalmarsson, which I was fortunate enough to do. Obviously has the sweet The Hammer inscription, so that's super cool. Very glad I was able to find one of those.
Another great design there too. I mean, just the Sign of the Times set has been one that's like I've always been a fan of, and this year is like from a design perspective, it seems like it's kind of a retro look, but also very modern. If that makes sense, like just the perfect blend of the two, and that's inscription there, just right across the whole card. Like I really love that. It just shows that personal touch there. So just like I know some collectors might not like that, but for me, it makes it extra cool. Like the more you look at it.
Yeah, it is interesting. When I first saw it, I was like, oh man, like he didn't have any regard for staying within the allotted
No, it
space.
makes it
But
better.
yeah, it is. It's cool, kind of just having that like big in your face inscription too. So yeah, definitely a very cool card. They look great, like Aaron was saying. And this is the first card that he's had that features his nickname. So that's also just a neat little touch for my collection as well. And then stepping it up with much larger, more significant cards for the last two. I don't know that you might know about this first one, Aaron. I can't remember if I told you or not. But obviously, in the last episode, if you guys have seen it, you're familiar. If you're not, I'm spoiling a little bit. But one of the cards featured last time was a custom made to order trophy winner card based on the Vezina collection that was of Marc-Andre Fleury and George Vezina. And that's an awesome card on its own, but I also kind of wanted to get one of the ones that was coming out of solid gold as well. So I was fortunate enough to be able to pick up one of those for my collection. It has a really nice red stitch on the Vezina piece. It's actually just loose. It's not even attached to the pad piece at all. It's just sitting there, which is kind of interesting. And then the Fleury stick piece is obviously very nice. It's from the E in Reebok, from a penguin stick. Very identifiable piece there for sure. It's just a really sharp and clean looking card. Definitely a lot cleaner and sharper than I thought that they were going to look. But once I got it in hand, just a beautiful card. And Dr. Price and his team did a great job on this set, like we talked about earlier when we had him on to talk about the product. But yeah, definitely was very excited to get this card for my collection and kind of add it to that custom made to order.
I'm not sure if you want to talk about this a little bit on the podcast, but didn't you have like a hand in helping with the design of that card? If you wanted to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, a little bit. We referenced that in a roundabout way when we were reviewing the product with Dr. Price on the show a few episodes ago. But yeah, Dr. Price did during the development phase of Solid Gold reach out to me to get my thoughts on some of the designs. And the Vezina Trophy winner set from the product was one of those that I, was fortunate enough to share my thoughts about, and kind of went back and forth, should it look like this? Should it look like that? What do you think of this? And, I was very adamant about having Vezina actually pictured on the card, because to me, if it's just the player plus a piece of Vezina memorabilia, that doesn't really feel like a Vezina card at all. It's a card of the other player that also just happens to have a piece of Vezina memorabilia. So, whereas to me, it's like, no, I want this to feel like a Vezina card as well. So that was something that I pushed pretty hard on, and a few other people that I know also, felt very strongly about that as well. And obviously, as you see, that's what the final design ended up being, is having Vezina featured kind of like a ghost-like image in the background, kind of similar in a way to that original Be a Player memorabilia design, which is, what we had kind of talked about during that design phase. It worked back then, so it's going to work again now. And obviously, like I said, they turned out great. So yeah.
That's awesome. When you can pay like a small part in not only, the creation of a set from a design perspective, but then actually adding one of those cards to your collection is just obviously, next level cool.
Yeah, definitely glad that I was able to track one down. I had seen a couple copies of it that had surfaced, people pulled them and showed them off, but weren't willing to move them. So I was like, oh man, like that's already 2 of the 6 that are essentially not possible to acquire. I'd come close on acquiring one of them actually, but then the guy changed his mind and just wanted to keep it. So I was kind of bummed about that. But then this one just popped up on eBay, and it was a buy it now or best offer. And I was like, okay, like that's a fair, like the buy it now is fair. I'm going to throw an offer out there just to see if the guy is sitting on his computer and sees the offer really quickly. And I think I made the offer and maybe sat around for like 15 minutes or something. And then I was like, I'm not chancing this. I'm just going to buy it just to be safe, make sure I get it, since it is a fair price, like I said. So don't regret that at all. Definitely grateful that I was able to get it. And it's a really nice copy as well. And then moving on to the final piece for me before turning things over to Aaron, this would have been really nice if I had had this the last episode, as same as the Fleury Trophy winner here, but this one especially would have been nice to have this last episode. But one thing I talked about was wanting to go after the historical relics set from the Vezina collection, and only needing a few left at this point. And one that I didn't have was the horsehair card. And I knew of a couple people that had them that, weren't necessarily looking to move them, but they weren't immediately just shooting it down either. So it was like, okay, if you can come up with something that makes sense for us, maybe something will work out. So ended up kind of going back and forth with someone on Hobby Insider. His username is D Garwood. So just a shout out to Dan there real quick. He was kind of, I've never really thought about moving it, but I'll at least listen, so make your pitch and we'll see what happens. And he kind of just, after giving it more thought, it was like, if you're going for the set, that's really cool. And, I don't want to stand in your way. And if I can help you out, great. So we were able to work out a deal where I was able to get the horsehair card from him. He pulled this back at release from one of his boxes. So just a really cool card. The horsehair is just something you don't see every day. And having a ton of it is really, really cool. So just a really nice card. And again, grateful that he was willing to work with me on that. I kind of strategized to buying back at the release of Solid Gold. I bought one of the jumbo horsehair cards out of that product to use as a trader to eventually get one from the Vesna collection. So I'm glad I did that, because if I hadn't, I don't think that Dan would have been interested in doing the trade, because, it otherwise would have just been, hey, are you willing to give this up and not get anything similar in return? And I would understand why most people would say, no, I don't want to do that. But, having that one from Solid Gold to use as a trader to get the one from the Vesna collection obviously is fairly appealing, to someone that would be moving it. So, he was still able to have a jumbo horsehair piece in his collection, and I was able to get the specific card that I was after. So that is the final piece for me. And I'm sure that this will probably be the last big card that I have for quite a while. So definitely a fun one to end on for sure.
Definitely an awesome one. Again, if for those who haven't watched episode 63, definitely give it a shout. It's available on all the podcast platforms, but obviously on YouTube as well, if you want to hear a little bit about and see a little bit about, all those pickups that Eric kind of alluded to. Definitely one for the ages for sure. Or not one, just many for the ages, that's for sure. I guess I'll move on to my pickup, unless there's anything you want to say. But if you've been following along the past couple of weeks, I've been luckily managed to include a couple game used jerseys. I know we've kind of been all over the map with this episode so far, different sports, different types of, cards, and now into jerseys. I thought this was a hockey card podcast. But anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, I just wanted to tell you guys quickly about a pickup I just managed to snag for the Inmouth collection. Another game used jersey. This one was from the Anaheim Ducks, which, if question marks are going off in your head right now, don't worry about it. Not many people know that he played for the Ducks. It was a very short amount of time at the end of the 2016-2017 season before he eventually left the KHL next season. This jersey was worn in warmups and in a backup capacity on March 12th, 2017 against the Washington Capitals. Enroth backed up Bernier that game. And what's cool about this jersey is it was actually kind of like an anniversary type jersey. The Ducks celebrated their 10-year anniversary of winning the Stanley Cup in 2007. And they also became the first team from California to hoist the Stanley Cup. So they kind of honored some members of the team that night. And they made these jerseys up specifically for that game. And it signals to that by the patch on the front right. And also the tag on the inside of the jersey is just kind of makes note of that these jerseys were made for one game only, and just a super cool fact there. So although Enroth didn't play for the Ducks officially in a game, to get any one of his jerseys, I think this one is definitely up there. And that luckily gave me all four teams, for all four teams that he's been a part of, at least one jersey from each of those teams. So that kind of hit that milestone there for sure. One that I didn't really know that I'd ever achieve. After hitting the Leafs jersey recently, I kind of remember a couple years prior, the Ducks one selling. And I'm like, like maybe one day I'll manage to get one of those. And then luckily a collector from Belgium, actually, who collected Anaheim Duck goalie jerseys only, was liquidating their collection and, was able to give me a great price on that jersey. So shout out to Gene out in Belgium. Super cool jersey. And yeah, definitely a nice pickup for sure.
Yeah, very cool. I mean, it's awesome getting any jersey, of your player, but when it's something like that where it's a team that they were only with for a very short period of time, it almost feels even more special getting that jersey, even if it isn't game worn. I know you say game used because it was worn while he was a backup during a game, but he wasn't stopping shots or anything, but it's still game worn in that sense, like you said. But regardless of what the jersey is, game issued, backup worn, game used, whatever it might be, when it's from a team that they only spent a very short period of time with, like I said, it just feels a lot more special just because of that kind of built-in scarcity of what it is and knowing that there's not that many of them out there. So the fact that, you're able to find that all these years later and round out your NHL part of your collection for his jerseys is awesome. Obviously, you have picked up quite a few of his jerseys here of late. 4 jerseys here in pretty short order is really amazing. And this one obviously is no different. It's a great piece, a great looking piece, gives you something a little bit different for your collection too. But yeah, definitely awesome that you're able to round out the NHL part of his career and having those teams represented in your collection.
Definitely.
So then transitioning to the main part of the episode, we did this a couple years ago, and I think we remember you guys liking it pretty well. So we figured we would do it again since there has been, quite a bit of activity within the NHL this offseason as far as trades and signings. So we wanted to do kind of an old faces and new places type of thing and unpack the hobby implications that some of those moves have had and will have. So we're just going to go down a big list of players here, tried to kind of narrow it down to some more notable names and just kind of talk about what type of hobby implications that player's movement will have for their cards. So these are kind of just based on, order of team. So there'll be, a smaller name next to a bigger name next to a, medium name, kind of just so on and so forth, instead of just loading up with all the big names and kind of working our way down or working our way up to bigger names. Kind of thought it would be easier to follow just going team by team, and probably more interesting hearing some of the names that way too. So first one, Ryan Strome going to the Anaheim Ducks. Not a guy that's had, a huge amount of hobby following or value over the years, but still a fairly notable player. But, going from the Rangers to the Ducks is probably going to hurt his hobby value a little bit, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a good take. Like Anaheim. I actually saw, a fun little survey, judging NHL logos. And, Anaheim was at the bottom of the list. So, I mean, I don't think people, think too kindly about their logo. I mean, like speaking from a guy who just picked up one of their jerseys, but also just, that kind of, I guess, sums up hockey out there sometimes. It's just, it might not be the, the top thing on their minds. So definitely, like going to Anaheim, it's not the ideal place sometimes. But hey, I wish them all the best.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of these guys will probably just have pretty basic analysis, like how we just did for Strome there, nothing crazy in depth to talk about there. He's going from a pretty big market to a much smaller market, going to hurt his hobby value. That's just, fact of the matter. So on to the next one. This is one of the more intriguing names on the list. And this is, pretty fresh, at least in terms of when we're recording this. Jonathan Huberdeau going to the Calgary Flames. That is, first of all, just the actual trade. I'm sure you guys have heard about it, but that is one of the biggest trades that I feel like the NHL has seen in decades, where you have 2 legitimate superstar level players being traded for each other. You just don't see that. So, it's interesting even just on surface level for the hockey implications, but, looking at the hobby, I think it's interesting because Huberdeau has really, kind of picked up steam over the last couple of years as he has really established himself as a star level player in the league, even though he was, with the Florida Panthers, which is typically not very great for your hobby value. Just the fact that he has established himself as a star has really helped his hobby value over the last couple of years. So going from Florida to Calgary, obviously the Flames have a ton of very diehard collectors in their fan base. And, I could definitely see that helping with his value. One thing to keep in mind for pretty much, maybe not every player on this list, but a lot of players, especially if it's their first time moving teams like it is for Huberdeau, you're going to, have that effect of, well, he's on a team where he isn't pictured on his rookie cards. So now he's a Calgary Flame. All of his rookie cards, he's a Florida Panther, obviously. So that kind of factors into value a little bit sometimes. So it'll kind of be interesting, especially with a big name like this and Huberdeau, even though I would say he's going to a larger market. As far as the hobby is concerned, I'm not necessarily sure how much of an impact that might have, because I think that for at least for some of those key rookie cards, it might stay fairly consistent because you're offsetting he's not on that team anymore compared to now he's on a more popular team. So I think those might kind of offset each other. But if I was to lean one way more than the other, I would say that his stuff will probably go up in value a little bit, especially for the non like notable stuff, kind of just more common things, more basic autographs, things like that. Those might see a bit of an uptick just because he is going to that more popular, more collected team in the Flames. So that's kind of my thoughts. I don't know how you feel about Huberdeau.
I would think that's a really good take. Like I would definitely agree. Like I wouldn't be surprised if his stuff went up. Another thing though, that you mentioned was, the team that he's pitched on in the rookie card, normally, over the 99% of the time I've been in the hobby, that's kind of the way it works. There kind of was that dip, or like stagnant or decline in price because he's not pictured on the team anymore. But in the last few years, we've seen that, like other sports, start to matter less and less. So I wouldn't be surprised if his stuff now just still stays steady, even though he's a Flame. And then, of course, once the season gets going and, he starts putting points up on the board and, presumably still keeps producing, a lot, I think like it'll still rise. And I don't think we'll see even a dip in value, even though he's pictured on a wrong team, because that's kind of like the old way of thinking now, I guess. It still could happen, but I think, the hobby has just so quickly evolved that people don't really see that changing uniform anymore. They do, and some collectors won't like it for sure. But, I think, it doesn't matter as much. It still matters, but not as much as I think it did even like 2 short years ago. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, but I definitely agree. I do think there's going to be, an uptick for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point that you brought up, that mindset has shifted a little bit in recent years. And I think that's, largely been fueled by other sports, but has also come into hockey as well, just saying, hey, it doesn't matter what team this guy plays for. Those are his rookie cards. You're not going to find a Huberdeau rookie card where he's with the Flames. His rookie cards are his rookie cards. So, which if you think about it, makes sense. It's like, that's what it was. That's all there is. You can't do anything about it. Do you want the card or not? So, I do think that shift in mindset has actually, been kind of a more beneficial thing and has given some of those rookie cards more value and more justice that they do deserve. But, someone like Huberdeau, it'll be kind of interesting to keep an eye on his values moving forward. But, because of that Flames factor, and especially if he does continue to produce how he has, and if, the Flames have some team success, definitely a guy that could go up in value quite a bit, even from where he has been, as a guy that, pushed for a potential, Hart nomination this year. He was spectacular this past season. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that. The other big piece that the Flames got in that trade is a guy that definitely has not gotten nearly as much attention, even just in a hockey sense, but obviously in a hobby sense as well, being Mackenzie Weegar, who, really in the last couple of years has come on as being one of these extremely underrated, underappreciated, do-it-all type of defensemen. And that was largely in part because of the injury issues that Aaron Ekblad has had over the last couple of years, gave Weegar, the opportunity to step into the spotlight a little bit more, show what he can do in a larger role. So, again, similar to Huberdeau, he's going to a much, larger hobby market with the Flames. He actually really doesn't have a whole lot of like notable rookie cards and stuff, just because he was kind of just not a nobody, but he was just a very common guy back in that time. He wasn't a hyped up prospect or anything, and he was on the Florida Panthers. So there just wasn't a whole lot of attention on him as a rookie. So, in a case like this, I could see the demand for those cards really going up quite a bit just because now, he has established himself as a really solid player and is now going to be on a pretty desirable team. So I think combining those two factors, Uyghur is a guy that for some of those more desirable cards of his, you could definitely see a pretty notable uptick.
I would also agree. I mean, admittedly, I haven't heard much of anything at all like with him, but just reading a little bit about him, it seems like, especially fans of him are really, really just in his corner about what he is now and what he's going to be in the future. So, I mean, if they're correct on that, and I would definitely trust their insight more than my own. Especially him being on a popular team, I think people are paying attention a little bit more to the hobby. Obviously, in hockey, more eyes and more eyes are always going to be a good thing. And they're going to spot talent like his. And, if he produces and keeps climbing the ladder like they say he's going to, I think he could be a really, really good pickup. And again, being on a Canadian team, there's going to be a lot of eyes on him for sure. So, I think that's a really fair assessment.
Yeah, and like I was saying, he doesn't have a whole lot of rookie year content. He did have a Young Guns, so I would say especially some of those rare Young Gun parallels like a High Gloss, the Acetate, things like that.
Even the
Those,
like exclusives, especially because he
Mhm.
doesn't have that many rookie cards. People are gonna go for the Young Gun first, and then what's the next best card of his? Well, probably the exclusives.
Mhm.
Instead of going off and picking up other rookie cards, you kind of don't really have an option, and so there might be more competition for cards like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just flipping through eBay as we're recording right now. Looks like he had an Ice Premier's rookie. He was an SP game used, but it seems like that's honestly about it for his rookie year content. So, I could see some of those rare SP game used parallels getting a big uptick. Even just a basic Young Gun or Ice Premier's rookie card, those could also see a little bit of an increase as well. So, yeah, definitely kind of an interesting one just because he doesn't have a huge hobby following or doesn't have, all that many cards. Just kind of an interesting one to keep an eye on there. These next two are, kind of, I don't know if I would say unique, but they're guys that are very, very established in their careers, longtime veterans that are now moving teams and going to a somewhat smaller market, that being Brent Burns and Max Pacioretty, both going to the Carolina Hurricanes, which, just as far as the hockey side of things, I think those were both great pickups for the Hurricanes, kind of being a Hurricanes fan by association through Jacob Slavin. Those are definitely moves that I'm very excited about and I think will pay big dividends for the Hurricanes this season. So it'll be fun to see that. But as far as their cards, it's kind of, I'm really curious to see how it pans out because, and I've said this before, the Hurricanes might not be the biggest market, might not have the biggest following, but they have a very, very hardcore devoted collector base that, really go all in on collecting Hurricanes cards and cards of Hurricanes players. So, I could see the demand for especially like rookie year cards of Burns and Pacioretty seeing a little bit of an uptick potentially. Maybe some of the non-rookie year stuff maybe actually dipping. Obviously, the Vegas Golden Knights are a pretty, hot team in the hobby and have been ever since they've been around. So, Pacioretty leaving Vegas, going to Carolina might, hurt in that regard. And obviously, Burns was in San Jose for seemingly ever. So a very established player in that sense, especially with the hobby, a lot of his cards being Sharks cards. I can see a lot of those non-rookie year cards for those players taking a little bit of a hit, but some of those, nicer rookie year cards of those players potentially even seeing a little bit of an uptick, even compared to, the teams that they have been with, just because, knowing that there is that extremely hardcore devoted segment of the Hurricanes fan base that really goes all in on nice cards of their players.
Yeah, like it's always difficult when, the player, a veteran changes teams because they have so much cardboard content out there. It's really, really difficult for, a player to move teams. And then across the board, they see increases in all their stuff, that comes up for sale. So like I would say for guys like those, they definitely had their time in the hobby. I think like Burns, is one that comes to mind for me that had a really kind of fast increase, of course, back, a few years ago, but obviously now not so much. So I would think maybe towards the end of their career, if a couple passionate fans, bid on a few rookie cards, I could see, an initial increase, especially if he starts off real well. You never know. So like I would put Burns, in the category of most likely for that to happen. But again, with the Hurricanes fans being so passionate, you never really know, and they both could start off with really quick starts. So like I would say over time, especially if they end their careers with the Hurricanes, maybe, an eventual decline. Like I don't think the Hurricanes are going to prop them up, into that hobby stratosphere of a new level for their cards. But I think initially, or if they get, a hot streak going, I think, those passionate Hurricanes fans can kind of maybe for this season just increase their cards a little bit. But I think overall, aside from the rookies, I would definitely think, just a continued decline, unfortunately.
That's fair. This next one is, in my opinion, at least, potentially the one name where his stuff is really going to take a hit just because, purely of the team that he is coming from and going to. And, this is one of the biggest headlines of the offseason, that being Johnny Gaudreau going from the Flames to the Blue Jackets. And obviously we know the Columbus Blue Jackets are not, a huge team as far as the hobby goes. That has nothing to do with Gaudreau as a player. It really doesn't even have anything to do with, the fan base or the market or whatever it might be. It's not a hockey, it's not a huge hockey market. It's not a big hobby market. So, by default, there just isn't going to be as much demand for his cards, now that he is a Blue Jacket compared to a Flame. So, I would say that his stuff, has the potential to take a fairly notable hit, honestly, almost immediately, I would say, just because there is not, nearly as large of a following in the hobby for the Blue Jackets as there is for the Flames.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, like definitely huge news. I mean, like I would agree overall, but I mean, like what I've learned in the hobby, like especially, getting on Instagram and stuff, like there's a lot of passionate Columbus fans out there too. As much as people might want to mock them in the, hockey world, or, it's where players go to kind of escape everything and be kind of, regular people, and treated, not like a crazy, Canadian market. Don't write off Columbus too much, especially, the collectors there. I mean, there's some passionate people there. So I don't know what's going to happen to his cards maybe long term, but I think initially, I still could think it keeps the value that they have right now. I know people don't like the way he left or anything like that, but I mean, like, I don't know, like something about his cards, I feel like, and, the Gaudreau fans out there, I still think that overall, I think they're going to stick with him a little bit and keep his value, kind of staying where it is. And, especially if he helps bring Columbus to a new level, we've seen, especially in the past 2 years, I'll reference this a lot, but, the landscape has changed. So it doesn't really matter at some points what team you were going to or what team you're on now, although we're going to mention that many times over the podcast. We've seen, maybe not long term, we'll see how that shakes out, but at least short term, any guy can kind of get on some sort of streak and then have their values kind of translate. It's like seemingly overnight. So I think for, a star like Gaudreau, who just had a breakout season, and then his name's been in the news a lot, I still think he could have traction in the hobby. So I don't know if what's going to happen long term, especially if he keeps putting up the points like over the rest of his career. But I think, the decline could happen, but, at first I expect his value to just kind of stay the same, if not rise. If he starts off hot and the team's maybe rolling, you never know, but I think, for me at least, I think it's going to stand still a bit. Like that's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, no, that's good. This would be really boring if we just agreed on everything. So I'm glad.
Well, from a traditional lens, like if this happened 5 years ago, I'd be like, oh man, like his hobby value's done. Mm-hmm. But in this new market, I'm questioning myself versus what I might thought of 5 years ago. And so I'm trying to look at that, and what the market could do with these big switching of teams, and you never know.
True. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens for sure. I feel like we don't necessarily have a whole lot of, you don't see this happen in the NHL super often, where you have a superstar level player leave his fairly notable team as a free agent and go to a very small market. Like that just doesn't happen very often. So,
yeah, this one was a little weird.
Yeah, I mean it was very unexpected just in terms of the actual hockey sense. But for the hobby, I don't know if I would say that this is an unprecedented case, but it's something that doesn't happen very often. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on for sure and see which way it kind of goes. And like you said, obviously his individual success will have an impact on that for sure, as well as any potential team success down the road as well. Moving on to four guys, I'm going to lump all four of these guys into the same boat. It's the four notable players that the Detroit Red Wings have brought in, that being Andrew Kopp, Dominic Kubalik, Ben Sherratt, and Ville Husso. I'm just going to lump all of them in and kind of say that I think their hobby value long term is just going to be based on how well they do with the Wings and how much team success they have. I don't think any of those four guys have big hobby value right now. At least Kubalik did during his rookie year when he came on the scene pretty hot with the Blackhawks, but has really cooled down the last couple of seasons. So I think with Kopp and Kubalik, especially if they can find their offensive game in Detroit, then I could definitely see a big uptick for them. Sherratt, I don't know. I don't think he's ever had a huge amount of hobby value or following, so I think he's probably going to be fairly similar. Husso, again, it's just going to be, what does he end up doing? Does he establish himself as a star goalie? If he does, then his stuff is going to go up. If he doesn't, and he's kind of just another goalie for the Wings, then I don't know that it'll change a whole lot. Like Alex Nedeljkovic last year probably hasn't seen a whole lot of hobby value change by going to the Wings. If he had performed really well, then yeah, his stuff would have gone up, but he was just okay, and so his stuff kind of stayed the same. So I think that Husso is probably in that same boat as well. And, like I said, all four of those guys it's going to be tied to their individual and team success.
I would agree, on all those points. I will say one thing about Husso, and probably a couple more times during this episode, but goalies, you never really know. Goalies are kind of weird where one strange run, and at least in the short term, people can kind of flood to their cards. I know his name was brought up a lot in free agency. A lot of teams wanted him. A lot of fans wanted him for their team. So I think, there are a lot of people that I think if he goes on a run and kind of carries that team, goalies are a weird one. They kind of have that kind of bandwagon fan mentality. So if he carries the team, and I mean carries the team, I think there could be a big increase in his cards, at least in the short term. But for long term, especially with these guys being, on Detroit and where they are right now, I don't see any change in where their cards are going to go, or, just maybe that just declining. So, I think that's a really good, fair take.
And I guess another thing too with Husso is, how long is he really going to be in the spotlight between the pipes for the Wings? They have Sebastian Cossa coming. He's, inevitably going to be their long-term answer in net. So how long is Husso really going to be the go-to guy for the Wings? I don't know that it'll be for more than a few years.
Yeah. So, I mean, like he would have to absolutely, again, just carry them to like a final or some magical run or something to really justify any explosion in his value. Yeah, no, for sure. And obviously you mentioned, the future, the Wings and their goaltending situation, maybe he kind of, because he's still young too, maybe he can kind of give himself a lot of value here in Detroit and then maybe move teams. It's possible. But again, like unlikely, but you never really know. True. And goalies are a weird one.
True. So speaking of goalies, this is probably, I would say one of, if not the most notable goaltending name that has moved teams this summer, going from as big of a market as it gets to another market that has a lot of hobby following, that being Jack Campbell going from the Leafs to the Oilers. This one is really interesting just because on the surface level, looking at going from the Leafs to the Oilers, his stuff is going to take a hit because, Edmonton is still a huge hobby market, but it's not, just this rabid market like the Leafs are. So I think just based on that, there is a little less demand there. So I think his stuff will take a little bit of a hit in the short term. But, if the Oilers can put it together, and he's clearly their answer in net for the next 5 years. So he's going to be their guy. If they have success, his stuff could explode in value. If they even get to a final, or if they do win a Stanley Cup, his stuff could really see a big increase, especially for obviously that rookie year stuff. And that'll be an interesting one. That's one of the more intriguing names on the list for me, just because he has had such kind of an interesting career, a lot of highs and some lows as well. And those highs have been high and those lows have been low. He came in with Dallas as a very hyped up prospect and then kind of took a long time to put it together and kind of started rising to prominence with the Kings and then went to the Leafs and obviously took off from there. And, was certainly really good in some terms for the Leafs and obviously was a little disappointing in some ways with the Leafs. So, it's going to be interesting to see, even just as far as his performance, how he does with the Oilers. And again, kind of going back to that individual and team success, how that will then feed into his long-term hobby value.
My boy, Jack Campbell, Toronto Maple Leaf. Yeah, Campbell, it was tough to see him go. I understand why they did. That contract is so tough for Edmonton if he does not perform. 5 years for, I think he's like 31 or something like that. So it's definitely a tough signing there potentially, unless he keeps growing into what they hope he's going to be or have some consistency. But yeah, I mean, if Edmonton makes the playoff and he's their number one goalie, I still think, there's tons of room to grow. And especially if they start going on a run or make a final, like you said, just some awesome potential there still for Jack Campbell. But obviously coming from the Leafs and like you mentioned, the hobby mecca that they are, like going to Edmonton. Not that Edmonton's not a mecca of hockey, they definitely are, but if he doesn't perform at least out of the gate to what they think he's going to be, it's definitely going to be tough for his cards. But I would give this one a lot of time, to see what the true measure of it is going to be. Not so much because he has a 5-year contract, just at least to the end of year 1 or maybe year 2 to see if the whole team kind of put it together and go on a run and give Campbell time to kind of take his net and then kind of roll with it. So this one's kind of like going to be a long-term thing. He could stick with the Oilers and be okay. And then year 5 of his contract, well, maybe not year 5, but right in the middle of his contract, they as a team put it together and go on a magical run and his cards could still explode, 3 years from now. So I still think for Campbell, with any goalie really, they can kind of play the long game with them. And if they go on a run and Edmonton finally puts it together, it's going to be really cool. And I think his cards can definitely, still have room to grow from there. So Campbell's going to be a weird one. It's either it's going to grow or, you give it that time and it's going to kind of crash and burn. Never really know. So we'll see if we can ever return to the crazy prices he had when he was a Leaf. So that's one's going to be interesting for sure. But yeah, I wish him all the best. I hope he does perform because he seems like a really cool dude.
Yeah, I would say just as far as, his confidence in himself, is certainly inspiring. I mean, he believes in his abilities and expects very high level of play from himself. And that's great. So hopefully he can put that together with the Oilers and they can finally get the job done here at some point. Another one of the biggest names on this list, we talked about this trade earlier, but Matthew Tkachuk going from the Calgary Flames to the Florida Panthers. This one, again, it's really interesting to think about, this is going to be one of those ones where I think is determined by how the hobby in the long term receives players not being pictured with the team that they were on their rookie card. So obviously Tkachuk is a star level player in the league. He's going from a desirable market in Calgary to a much, much smaller hobby market with the Panthers. So just on the surface, that's going to hurt his value. But again, it's going to come back to that individual and team success, if that can sustain or raise his value. But just on the surface, my thoughts, not to just go right into the old mentality like we were talking about earlier, but I would just have a hard time seeing his value be sustained short of him becoming like an Art Ross or a Hart Trophy winner, or if they win the Cup. If he does that, or if the team does that, then yes, I think that his stuff will go up in value at that point. But at least for right now, I would just have a hard time seeing his value be maintained just because of that, fairly significant drop off in terms of the market from a hobby standpoint.
Yeah, definitely, a big move for sure. It's hard to just talk about where they end up as far as like a hobby perspective, to me, we're also kind of mixing in the contracts and long term, like I was questioning how that contract is going to age. I feel like if Calgary ends up keeping Huberdeau, that's it. Yeah, my mind blanked out for a second. I think he can maybe not outperform his contract, again, assuming they, can sign him, but definitely have more longevity than Kachuk. So, I mean, that one's going to be potentially a tough one long term. But again, he could equally just as well prove me wrong. And so, as far as Hobley implications there, he's going to Florida, which I feel like, was again kind of like a death sentence for your hobby value. But I think in the last couple of years, they've been gaining, I guess, around the league from a hockey perspective, definitely more respect. And so we'll see, hopefully a mainstay with them as they're kind of on the up. We'll see what that happens with their hobby values. So it's going to be really interesting to see, how that big contract plays out over time, and obviously how his stay in Florida plays out over time too. But I definitely think his cards will take a bit of a hit, because I don't know if he'll be able to recreate the production he had this year. And obviously him being in Florida, if they have a disappointing end of the season like they did this year, I don't think that spells good news for his hobby value. But again, him still being a young, good player, I think he can definitely prove me wrong. And especially similar-ish to Jack Campbell, if the team puts itself together, I definitely think everyone on that team is going to be having a little bit of a bump. So, and him definitely included, as their new star acquisition. So definitely going to be another interesting one to see, and just such a big trade for sure. So it's so cool to analyze both sides of it, from a hockey and hockey card perspective. So yeah, hopefully he does really well for Florida. Again, just pulling for him.
Yeah, and kind of a similar situation as Johnny Gaudreau too. Going from the Flames to a small market. We'll see what happens.
Exactly. I mean, they're too good of a players for their play to not be shown in the hobby. Like in years past, the guy can play great, and their hobby value stays the same. But in today's landscape, good players are getting they're getting paid first off, obviously, but they're getting, I guess, the respect as far as their card values are concerned. We're kind of seeing that no matter which market they're in. So if these guys could again put it together like they did this past season, I definitely see it translating to their card prices no matter where they play.
This next one for me is a lot more simple and straightforward, so I don't think we'll have a whole lot to say here. But Kevin Fiala going from the Minnesota Wild to Los Angeles Kings. He's a guy who was already moved in his career going from Nashville to Minnesota in the first place a few years ago. So, I think that, rookie year factor not being pictured with the same team isn't really going to be much of a factor here. So, to me, it's just he's going from Minnesota to Los Angeles. And, obviously Los Angeles is one of the largest markets in the US. Even if they don't necessarily have a massive hobby following, I do think that will probably see a little bit of an uptick for his value in the hobby, just because it is such a large market, and because the Kings are also kind of an up and coming team. And I think that he fits in with that group really nicely and could definitely see some pretty nice individual success in the years to come. So, for me, though, that's not a super notable name on the list. I would see his value at least having the potential to go up in time.
Yeah, I would say that's a really good, solid assessment there. And, I would definitely agree. Not being, an expert on him per se, I would think that's definitely a great assessment.
Another one that I think is fairly straightforward, in large part thanks to the market that he's going to, but is an interesting one nonetheless, even for myself personally, that being Kirby Dach going from the Blackhawks to the Montreal Canadiens. And, obviously, not that Chicago isn't a big market hockey-wise and hobby-wise, because it is, but going to Montreal is a whole other level. So being that he was a very high draft pick, a very hyped up prospect, going to a big market, in terms of hockey and the card hobby, like Montreal, is definitely going to be good for his value, especially considering that by the end of this past season with the Blackhawks, his value had really taken a pretty noticeable hit, especially in comparison to what it used to be. Hawks fans really started to sour on him just because he wasn't putting up the numbers that people were expecting from him, and he wasn't fitting into the role that people thought he was going to be in at this point in his career. And, honestly, that really wasn't even his fault. The Hawks kind of set him up for failure by rushing him. And then, he got that really bad wrist injury at the World Juniors, and then they rushed him back from that. And then he's just never really been put in a position to succeed. And as a result, shocker, he didn't succeed. So his value really kind of dropped off over the last year or so. And because of that, obviously then going to Montreal, huge for his hobby value. Pretty much overnight, his stuff exploded back up in value to kind of what it used to be when he was first breaking into the league. And if he can even come close to reaching his original potential, even if he's a second line player for the Canadiens, his value will go up and up and up and up, as the years go by and as they, get back to being a team of prominence.
I think that's a great assessment again. I mean, like anytime you have a guy moving to Montreal, I mean, and they're passionate fan base, passionate collectors, I think there's always room for movement on, their cards. I mean, I know the franchise has been, a lot of highs, a lot of lows recently. And so I think if they put it together and start to show that he's definitely a guy that's going to be part of their future, I think, he could eventually just have that continued success, in the hobby. So yeah, like I said, a move to Montreal, I think like almost always is, a good move for your hobby value, especially, if you're a good young player.
These next few are guys that I would say are, again, kind of more straightforward. So we won't necessarily unpack them a whole lot. First up, a couple guys going to the Nashville Predators in Nino Niederreiter and Ryan McDonough. I would say that, at least in my opinion, Niederreiter probably will be a pretty lateral move. Again, he's already moved in his career a couple times. And, I don't know. I think Nashville and Carolina are probably pretty similar markets. McDonough, I would think, is probably going to be fairly similar or maybe take a little bit of a dip. Just from a team standpoint, going from Tampa Bay to Nashville, it's a little bit of a downgrade. So, probably see a little bit of a dip in his value there. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about those two guys in particular, Aaron. If not, I'll just move on to the next few guys.
Yeah, I think that was well said. So, I mean, yeah, we can just move on to the next guys.
Okay. Moving on to a trio of guys that are going to the New Jersey Devils. I'm going to start with two that I think are kind of, in a similar boat, John Marino and Vitek Vanacek, going from teams that are, a little bit bigger in the hobby, in the Penguins and the Capitals, going to the Devils. Could see a little bit of a hit in value there. Again, this is their first time moving. So, you could see that, rookie year factor, kind of come into play here. But again, individual and team success could certainly see some growth for both of them. But, the Devil that is most intriguing to me is Andre Palat, just because, a career Tampa Bay Lightning, a two-time Stanley Cup champion, moving for the first time, going to a much smaller market in the New Jersey Devils, at least, from a hobby standpoint. So, he's a kind of guy that on the surface, when you just look at the move, you'd say, oh yeah, he's going to have a hit in value. But to me, the more I think about it, I actually think he has potential to go up in value because he's going to be a go-to player for the Devils, whereas he was always a complementary piece for Tampa Bay. So, it's going to kind of come down to, that push and shove of, okay, he's on a different team from his rookie year stuff, and it's a smaller hobby market. How is that going to potentially offset the fact that he's going to be in a larger role individually now? And the Devils being a team that generally, people would say are on, an upswing here and, have some pretty good young pieces in place. So that one is an interesting one to me just because, it really is, okay, where's the balance going to end up being between, where he was and where he is now and, the role that he used to be in and the role that he will be in with the Devils. So that's kind of, an interesting name for me to keep an eye on just because of all of those factors.
Yeah, again, just another great assessment. It's going to be interesting with Palat. Obviously, Cup champion. So, there's obviously going to be interest there for sure. I'm just wondering, with this crop of guys, if, you mentioned that New Jersey is kind of like, hopefully, on the upswing here, as a franchise. So like part of me is wondering, are these guys going to be around, when that success like truly starts coming around? Or like, are these guys, unfortunately going to be part of the team where they're kind of not at that level yet. And so they're not going to really get that value here with this team. And so that's kind of like where I'm thinking these guys are at timing wise. I don't really know if we'll see, any value increases for these guys, for me personally.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, that's a good point for sure. It'll be interesting to see how things, unfold with the Devils and with whatever success they might have in the future. This next one, again, feels pretty straightforward to me. Alex Romanov going from the Montreal Canadiens to the New York Islanders. Like we said about Montreal, that's a huge hobby market. The Islanders, not so much. Not that they're tiny, not that there aren't devoted collectors, none of that. And, this isn't about the Islanders. It's just the fact that he's leaving the Canadiens and, I think as a result, that's really going to hurt his hobby value, both in the immediate future and, probably the long term as well, just because he isn't going to have that natural, just immediately inherent value of being a Montreal Canadian.
Definitely, I think that's 100% correct. Like I remember pulling some of his cards, and obviously Montreal collectors just go crazy for any rookie card kind of wearing their jersey. So like those were definitely easily movable. So again, just for him leaving Montreal and going to the Islanders, just from your hobby perspective, it just definitely just not do you any favors. So, I wish him all the best of luck, obviously, just as a player. But, from a hobby perspective, just, I don't see his cards going up anytime soon.
Very true. So next one, this is kind of an interesting one in some ways. I would say more so on the ice than off. Vincent Trocheck going from the Carolina Hurricanes to the New York Rangers. I would say to me, Trocheck has never had huge hobby value, largely because he's been in small markets in Florida and Carolina. And, now he's getting that opportunity to go to a big market in New York. So, in that regard, I could see his cards do go up in value, especially considering that the Rangers are a team, on the upswing. And, he'll certainly be a big part of whatever success they will have in the future. But again, I kind of question, is he really going to be a go-to type of player for them? I don't really think so. He's the kind of guy that I feel like almost regardless of where he is, unless it's like a Toronto or Montreal, but pretty much anywhere else, he's just never going to have a huge amount of hobby value. So, I would say that, yeah, he'll probably across the board see a small uptick in his value. I don't think that you're really going to see a huge amount of difference just because of the type of player he is, just inherently kind of being a complementary piece, even though he is an extremely effective complementary piece. Those guys just typically don't have a huge amount of hobby value regardless of where they are. So, I think that you could see a little bit more demand for his cards, but maybe not much of an increase in value.
I definitely agree. I think that last part definitely speaks volumes. People could definitely see an increase, in certain like time wise, certain increases in this card or that card, but just overall value wouldn't really on average go up. I think the Rangers are kind of hitting their stride here, I think. And, if he scores like a big playoff goal or something, I definitely could see certain cards jumping here or there, but, those would kind of be outliers. Overall, I also say that you won't see an increase across the board with this stuff, unfortunately.
These next ones are interesting to me, both as far as, on ice and off ice. Obviously, the Ottawa Senators have had a pretty strong offseason. A lot of people would say so, acquiring Alex DeBrincat, Claude Giroux, and Cam Talbot. And, as such, I would say that, a lot of people kind of almost feel like this is really expediting their rebuild. And, okay, we just got two legit top six forwards and a legit starting goalie. And, those are things that they were kind of lacking, in the last year or two, so then mix in that natural growth of their young talent, guys like Josh Norris, Tim Stützle, Jake Batherson, the glut of young defensemen they have, add these three guys into that group. And, we could see some pretty special things on the ice for the Senators in the near future here. So, to me, I think that the potential for the cards of DeBrincat, Giroux, and Talbot to go up is certainly there. For a guy like DeBrincat, it's the first time he's moving in his career. So that again factors into it, like we've talked about many times already. But he, I feel like, is going to be a guy that is going to really kind of sink or swim with that spotlight in Ottawa. He handled it really well in Chicago, but he also wasn't just the guy because Patrick Kane has always, been there alongside him. And, now in Ottawa, he's really going to be expected to help carry the mail for that offense. So, I think that that's going to factor into his long-term value a lot. I would expect that he'll handle it well, though. Everything I've seen from him as a Blackhawks fan, he's a great player, in so many ways. Everyone thinks he's just a goal scorer. He's not. He's a very well-rounded player, responsible defensively, kills penalties. He can do it all. So, I think that's something that Senators fans will really embrace. And, I think that could certainly help his value as well, just kind of becoming a fan favorite, even if it isn't, that he's scoring 40 plus goals every year. I think just the fact that people gravitate to a player like that could certainly help his value as well. Giroux is interesting to me just because, he's been a Philadelphia Flyer forever. And yes, I understand he was with the Florida Panthers after the deadline last year for their playoff run, but I'm going to kind of more look at it from he's essentially a lifelong Philadelphia Flyer now going home playing for the Ottawa Senators. And I don't know, to me, I would say that there certainly is that potential to increase if there's the team success, like I mentioned earlier. But I would almost say, even though he is going to a Canadian market, his stuff might still take a bit of a hit just because he was with Philadelphia forever, like I said, and now he's not. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not inherently a bad thing. It's just that, he's not there anymore. He's not a Philadelphia Flyer anymore. And I think that mentality could have an effect on his cards. And, I don't know. It's certainly, he's at the latter half of his career for sure. So that also, he's not going to be that elite level player that he used to be back in the day. So you can't rely on, that production to kind of make up for that, at least in my opinion. So we'll see what happens with him. But if the team success comes, then you could see his value stay consistent or go up. But I would say that he could actually go down in time. Talbot, like we said, for goalies, it's just going to kind of depend on, the individual and team success factor. The potential of being a starting goalie in a Canadian market obviously is beneficial in terms of, what you could look like for your hobby potential. So like I said, it's just going to come down to how he does and how the team does in the future. But, the potential is there. So we'll just see what happens. And I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts, kind of all over the place with those three guys that, it's hard to say for sure with those guys, but that's just my thoughts. I don't know what you think, Aaron.
Ottawa, it pains me as a Leaf fan, but Ottawa's going to be scary, I think. They're really building up to something big, I think. They're going to be, a really good team, I think, in a couple of years. Whether these guys are going to be a big part of that, who knows? Hopefully, you think, like with these, big acquisitions that they've made. So I think, like all these guys that we're mentioning, I think could play, a part in that for sure. It's going to be interesting with Giroux there. Obviously, like being in the later half of his career, how much will he play in that success? And if he's going to be around for that. But, guys like DeBrincat, Talbot, I think those guys can definitely, in the short/medium term here, help bring Ottawa to that next level, if they perform like they want to perform. So I think their values can definitely come along with that. Obviously being in a, big market Canadian city. So Ottawa is going to be, again, just a scary team soon. And hopefully these guys are along for the ride.
Yeah, absolutely. This next one, kind of an intriguing name, just more for off-ice reasons than on ice. Tony DeAngelo going from Carolina to Philadelphia. Obviously, Philly has a larger hobby following than the Hurricanes do. So just on paper, you would think that he would potentially see a little bit of an uptick in value. I think for him, though, it's really going to come down to how he kind of blends in with the Flyers, because if Flyers fans like you, you're gold. If they don't, good luck. Like, you are as good as garbage if Flyers fans don't like you as a Flyer. So I don't know. It's really hard to predict on this one just because he's a guy who's never really had huge hobby value anyway. So it's not, a huge name to note, I guess, in that sense. But I put him on the list just because of that Philly factor. Is he going to fit in? Are people going to like him? Are they not going to like him? That's going to ultimately, kind of determine what his hobby value looks like moving forward.
Yeah, especially with his off-ice stuff, it's going to be really hard to see any, at least in my opinion, any sort of hobby increase. especially any long-term hobby increase, again, maybe some short-term stuff, if the fans like him, but like other than that, I just don't see it for him at all.
Moving on to the Pittsburgh Penguins, they brought in a couple of fairly notable blue liners this summer, that being Jeff Petrie and Ty Smith. Two very, I would say polar opposite types of guys in terms of, their hobby outlook right now. Petrie, being on the back half of his career, having come from Montreal, going to Pittsburgh, he didn't have a whole lot of hobby value as it was. So I don't think that you'll see much of notable change there. If anything, maybe dropping a little bit just because he did leave Montreal. Ty Smith is an interesting one because he's been a fairly hyped up prospect for the Devils, now going to Pittsburgh. So he's leaving that first organization, going on to a second one, where he'll probably get a better opportunity to establish himself with the Penguins than he did in New Jersey. The Devils were very patient with him and wanted to make sure they were not rushing him, which is great. That's how you should handle prospects, especially guys that you have high expectations for. I was surprised that New Jersey ended up moving on from him as quickly as they did. Who knows if that's an indication of where they felt his development was, or if they just really liked John Marino and felt it was worth the price. But Ty Smith has always kind of been that guy that has been viewed as more so an offensive defenseman, but a guy that's very well rounded as well. So, guys like that, kind of the comparison that you heard a lot, when he was a draft eligible prospect was kind of like that Duncan Keith type of mold. Not that he would ever be, that level of a player, but just kind of that style of a player where, puts up the numbers, but can do a little bit of everything pretty well. That generates some decent hobby value, not as much as if you're just purely, a stud offensive defenseman, like a Cale Makar. Again, he can do it all too, but he's, an elite level type of defenseman. So that's a little bit different. But Ty Smith, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I guess I would say if I just had to say, I don't see his value changing much with this move, though I would say that, he still has his career in front of him. So whatever he makes of his career is what's going to ultimately determine his hobby value.
Yeah, I think that's, again, another good hobby assessment. Like I was trying to think, I don't think there's really anything I can add to those ones at all. So just well said.
Moving on, Seattle has brought in a couple of notable forwards in Oliver Bjorkstrand and Andre Burakovsky. Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing that's going to factor in here is that they're going to the Kraken. Just because they're a new franchise, they have that attention on them as far as the hobby goes. So I could see them getting an uptick in value just because, their fans and collectors are, these are established NHL players that, very well could become fan favorites. I would expect that both of these players will become fan favorites with the Kraken. So I think that's just naturally going to help their value, especially because they were very much complementary pieces with the teams that they were with before, especially Burakovsky. So the fact that they might have a little bit more of an opportunity with the Kraken combined with the fact that they will likely become those fan favorite type of players, I could definitely see their value going up, both in the immediate future and long term as well.
Definitely. I know it's not free agency, but just with Shane Wright going there as well, just, I think his value will be pretty tough to beat, especially for, a fourth overall pick. It's going to be kind of interesting seeing, a fourth overall pick get that kind of attention, but I think he will, just in the hobby, because like those guys there, I think their value is going to go up, at least in the short term, just because like we saw with Vegas, just everyone wants to pick up cards of those guys. And then there was other people getting a chance with a new organization, just making kind of a new name with themselves and then increasing even more, their hobby value. So, I think those guys, fall into that category, and it's going to be really cool. Both Seattle fans and just fans across the league, just wanting a piece of this team. So I definitely think their cards can definitely, and just all Kraken cards, I think, are going to be in for a really cool increase. Not that they really had any sort of decrease because they haven't been in the NHL before. So I think, like, wherever they start at, I think it's going to be obviously a win for, the hobby.
Yeah, absolutely. We're still getting that initial wave of Kraken cards, as we speak. So, it's just going to be fun to see where the hobby takes these cards, both now and, the next year or two, and also long term. Shifting gears to, the one that I know you're excited to talk about, the more notable names that have headed to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm just going to turn the floor over to you. You can unpack these four names, and then if I feel the need to add anything, I'll do so. But I know there's at least a couple of names here that you're probably really excited to talk about.
Definitely. I mean, my team, Toronto Maple Leafs, definitely an interesting offseason for sure. Opinions on both sides of the fences for all these guys. When hearing other people, like other Leafs fans' opinions, but I'll give you mine. Those names here: Kelly Jarnkrok, Victor Mete, Matt Murray, and Ilya Samsonov. Definitely two of those ones at the end I'm really curious about. But for all these guys, I'm just gonna just mention that I think just being in the market and where we are as a team, I think they're all hopefully set for a breakout year. I think. I mean, we say this every year as Leaf fans, there's always next year, always next year. But, I think this year is another one of those always next year years, and that it could be the year, right? So I think if these guys play any sort of positive role with the Leafs, I think it's just going to be just awesome for their hobby values, depending on who you ask. Toronto might be the center, of the hockey universe. And I think, for their cards, I think they're right there tied in with that. So I don't really know too much to really speak on the first two guys, but I'm just going to focus on the goalies, if you don't mind, just Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov. I mean, with Samsonov, I know he did have some initial, hype about him when coming into the league. Just a lot of fans out there, the guy. And so I think just being so young and just still sort of unproven, I think there's so much growth that he could have with the Leafs, even though he could be in a backup position. I still think, even with the backups we've seen in the past couple of years just become, just fan favorites. And, with him being so young, I think that could still translate into, hobby increases for sure. So Samsonov is going to be an interesting one. I know we haven't seen too much of him in his early career, but I still think even with a limited role on the team, I still think his value could really go up, especially if, we'll see with Matt Murray, but with Samsonov, he could end up playing more games than you think, depending on how it goes with Murray. And I'll speak on Murray a little bit. Just his values are pretty good. Like I know that there has been kind of like that fall from grace when he was with Pittsburgh, but I just think that with those two cups here, his value is still sort of like pretty positive, I think, especially on some key cards. And so obviously the two cups help, but I think with Toronto and just obviously coming from Ottawa, I still think there's so much growth with him and just, oh man, it's going to be so interesting. I think there is so much hope for the guy, and I really hope that he can grab that starting role and just run with it. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, like all the time with him. I know he has 2 years left on his deal, but, I hope that he can really just grab that net and just roll with it. And then if you're, a Leafs fan like me, and one day you want to see them lift the cup again, it's going to be so cool if he's that guy to bring them to the playoffs and just go on a good run, or at least win a round. I think that would be amazing. So, yeah, if he's that guy to do it, that'd be such a good story. And definitely his card values are going to go soaring. So it's going to be such an interesting season for the Leafs. Just their starting goalie, but also their backup goalie too. It's just going to be just awesome. We saw what happened with Campbell. And, I think if Murray gets on a good run here, I think that could even surpass, the positive vibes we had for Campbell, because just Matt Murray's story is just incredible, especially if he can put it together with the Leafs. It would just add another chapter into his unique, but, I think hopeful rest of his NHL career. So I wasn't a fan initially of the signing just because, I'm kind of in a win now mode, and there still is that gamble on Matt Murray, but I hope it goes well. I really hope it goes well. So it's going to be such a cool thing to see if it does. And his values are going to just go soaring, I think.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. I would say that probably Murray more than anyone else on this list, but I'd also lump Samsonov in with him. They could just explode if they have success. And that's just territory for being a Leafs player. And, it's going to be really interesting. I kind of put Mete on this list just because this is something I don't know how Leafs fans and collectors might receive, but he was obviously a Montreal Canadiens draft pick and prospect and player when he broke into the league. So all of his rookie year stuff is pictured with the Canadiens. So how is that going to impact how Leafs fans and collectors might look at his cards? I don't really know. I could see people being like, oh, like whatever, I don't care. He's a Leaf. I want his cards. Or I could see them saying, yeah, that's a Canadians card. I don't want it. So that's kind of why I put him on this list. I don't think he'll be a huge factor for the Leafs. If he has a full-time role, it'd probably just be as a bottom pairing defenseman, but just kind of an interesting tidbit to note there. But yeah, I mean, going back to the goalies, it's going to be so interesting to see what happens with them. And like you said, any success that they have as a team, whoever is the goalie that's responsible for that, their stuff is going to explode. I don't know how I feel about the Matt Murray experiment either. And I could very well see Samsonov ending up being the guy in Toronto long term. He's very young. He was very hyped up when he came in, has had some highs, has had some lows, but still has, time to put it together. And if Murray either struggles or if he has injury issues again and Samsonov is put into that starting role and, he grabs the bull by the horns and runs with it, that could, be huge for his value too. So it's going to be really interesting with both of those guys in particular to see, not only this year, but long term as well, what might happen with either or both of them. So yeah, you did a good job unpacking those guys. Speaking of Toronto, we now have a guy who is leaving the Leafs in Ilya Mikheyev going to the Vancouver Canucks. And this one is also kind of interesting. You're going from that massive Toronto market, but you're going to another pretty rabid fan base in Canada with the Canucks. So I could see, just because similar to, someone like Palat, he's going to be having a larger role with the Canucks than he did with the Leafs, most likely. Mikheyev, even though he played on that second line, and had good chemistry with those guys, he was never really, expected to be the go-to guy for Toronto. And not that he'll be expected to be the go-to guy for Vancouver, but I think he will probably have a little bit of a bigger role in Vancouver than he did in Toronto. So I think, pairing that with, the fact that he's still in a very big hobby market in Vancouver, I would say that I could see his value either staying pretty similar, or if he does end up, really taking off, he could even go up. I think just naturally looking, oh, he left Toronto, your initial reaction is, yep, his stuff is going to go down. But I don't know. I think just based on the fact that he'll have a bigger role could offset that, dip in the, market demand, so to speak. So it'll be interesting to see, but, I could see his stuff staying fairly consistent long term.
I hope so. I mean, like my first, thought when, I saw him on this list was just that he's leaving Toronto. And I think that obviously in this case would have, a negative effect on his cards. And although he's joining Vancouver, which obviously is another, strong market, like I'm just not sure if their collector base has enough room, with all the, great players on that team, the young talent that they have. And so I'm hoping that he can continue his hobby value, but I'm just not sure. But if he keeps on developing and keeps staying hungry for that puck and all that stuff and continues to hopefully score some goals, it definitely could happen. But, just my first assessment was obviously if you're leaving the Leafs, it's going to be hard to sustain that type of hype around your cards.
Yeah, that's a good point you mentioned, with the other players in Vancouver, a lot of those young players have had some pretty high highs and some lows as well. Pettersson, Besser, Horvat, Hughes, all of those guys have had stretches where they've had really good hobby value and stretches where they haven't. So that's also, that's a really good point that you brought up there. So that'll be interesting to see how that might factor in with Mikheyev moving forward. Wrapping up with a trio of guys in Washington: Connor Brown, Dylan Strome, and Darcy Kemper. To me, I would say Brown and Strome probably not going to move the needle a whole lot. Strome is a very polarizing player. If you ask Blackhawks fans, some people love Strome, some people hate Strome. I would more so fall into the latter camp just because, to me, he just isn't the type of player that's ever going to become a star player. He does what he does well, but he just doesn't have enough in his game to really make him a star player. And those things that he doesn't do well do really prohibit him as a player. So, I don't know. Some people are really excited about this move and, oh, he'll play with Ovechkin and get all kinds of assists and whatever. that's possible. And maybe, he does match up really nicely with Ovechkin and sees a huge boom in his value. But, I don't know. To me, I would say that probably won't see much of a change. Same with Connor Brown. Kemper is an interesting one for me. And, I'll let Aaron talk more on this too, but it's just going to come down to, what he ends up doing with the team. He's coming from Colorado, where he won a Stanley Cup, going to Washington, who is, generally speaking, an older team, kind of at the end of their window. So I don't know that he has a whole lot of potential to go up. He could, if they win a cup, but short of that, I would say that he's probably going to stay similar or even drop.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. I mean, I'm on the same page for those other guys. Obviously going to Washington, like you said, kind of like a declining team at the end of their sort of run, I guess you could say. So it's going to be kind of tough, like as the time goes by. And as far as Kemper goes, you just won a cup, his value is going to be as high as they ever will be. And unless you go back to back, I mean, it's going to be really tough to kind of sustain that. So I definitely think that's a pretty fair assessment. So it's kind of cool to go through this list and see where those hobby values are going to go, either up or down, depending on where they landed. So yeah, definitely a really cool thing to do. And, this was nice. It was good kind of doing this again.
Yeah. Talking about value and, speculating on what guys' values might look like moving forward obviously isn't something we do very often. It's not the type of outlook that we have on the hobby, but we recognize that it is an important thing to consider, especially in this day and age in the hobby. So it's fun to talk about this stuff, even if you're not looking at hobby value, just talking about, oh, this guy went here, this guy went there. It's fun talking about that stuff. So glad that we did this, and lots of intriguing names that we covered, huge trades, big signings, lots of surprises this offseason. So this has been a lot of fun for sure. And just wrapping up real quick, touching on the contest that we're running. If you guys aren't aware, we're doing a contest for some of the cards that were opened up in that 21-22 Upper Deck Series 2 box that was sent to us compliments of Upper Deck. And as such, it's only fair for us to share some of those cards with you guys. So for the giveaway, we'll pick someone to receive some of those Upper Deck 2 cards who shares with us which card shown on episode 63, which is the last episode that we referenced at the beginning of the show. Which of the cards shown on episode 63 is your favorite and why? Don't forget the why part. If you just say the favorite, you're not entered. You got to say the why. So just reach out to us on social media. We've done some posts on there, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, for that contest. So just be sure to go on there and follow the steps on that post to get entered to win some sweet cards from 21-22 Upper Deck Series 2. So I think that will do it for episode 64. Obviously, this one was a little bit longer, but again, like we said, just something different, a little bit of a change of pace and just fun talking about, the off-season transactions. It's one of the best parts of the season, even though there's nothing happening on the ice. It's really fun seeing who's going where. So this was a lot of fun and we really enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys did too. Please be sure to follow us on social media. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Center Ice Cardcast, and on Twitter at CICC. Please also be sure to subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice to make sure you never miss a future episode. Until next time on Center Ice Cardcast, keep collecting those hockey cards.